This is the vodcast for Chapter 5, Section 2, Settling the Great Plains. As you watch the notes, as you watch the vodcast, make sure you're completing the notes, and then once your notes are complete, make sure you're studying 5 to 10 minutes each night. Remember the coaching philosophy, and then watch this vodcast often to help you study. These notes should only be a page and a half, or maybe the front of one page and the back of another. If I didn't give them to you in class, you can access them on Blackboard. Just log in, go to course content, click on lesson 2, and then follow the links from there. Our objectives for this section, you can see there. So we're going to talk about how the West, the Great Plains, was settled, and also how the settlers survived on this land. Now, it's very important that you understand that what we are talking about is also taking place during the time of Reconstruction. We just finished the lesson on Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877. This time period, they were moving out west. People were moving out west and settling out west. So this section that we're talking about right now is going on at the same time as Reconstruction. All right, let's get started with your notes. The railroads are a huge reason why land opens up out west. In an effort to encourage settling of the West, the United States government, using land acquired from treaties from the Native Americans, and these treaties are sometimes honest, most of the time dishonest, but using land gained from Native Americans through treaties, the United States government began to give away land to railroad companies to encourage settlement. And you can see here the land that the government was giving away. They were giving it away in rations or plots of 10 square miles. Or 20 square miles. It depends on where the railroad built track. So let's just use the Union Pacific and Central Pacific as examples here. If the Union Pacific built rail lines through an already existing state, they would be given 10 square miles for every 1 mile of track laid in the state. And then let's say it's a territory, then they're going to be given 20 square miles. The difference is populated versus non-populated. The non-populated territories, you're going to have more dangers, you're open to Native American attacks for one, or maybe whatever, just not a lot of amenities like towns and things that are around. And so the government had to offer some incentive for railroads to lay track in a territory. The ultimate goal is to connect East Coast to West Coast, and this was a goal by Abraham Lincoln while he was still alive. So again, 10 square miles of track of land given for every 1 mile of track laid in a state, or 20 square miles of land given for every 1 mile of track laid in a territory. The two railroads, again, two main railroads that built the very first transcontinental railroad. Transcontinental means it spans from east to west coast across the United States. Transcontinental. Central Pacific starts in, I think it was Sacramento, California, and the Union Pacific starts in somewhere close to Chicago, but eventually makes its way all the way out to Kansas, and then starts working its way west. The two will eventually meet in what will become the state of Utah, actually Promontory Point, Utah, where the ceremonial golden spike is driven in to connect the two lines. Again, huge increases, or this building of this railroad, I should say, brought in many Chinese. A lot of white American workers would not do this labor. They felt that it was too hard of work for too little pay. And so the Central Pacific specifically had to go out looking for people to lay track, and they eventually settled upon Chinese immigrants. The Union Pacific was able to get some Civil War veterans to work, and a lot of Irish immigrants. So we see a lot of immigrants building our railroads. Again, by 1880s, there's 5 transcontinental railroads across the United States. Now, the land that was given to the railroads back in 1 subpoint A, that land is then sold to farmers, and the railroads start making a huge profit off of this land. This land was given to them free. All they had to do was build track, and then they turn around and they start selling it to farmers at huge costs. And due to some farming issues in Europe, we see some more European farmers move to the United States to take advantage of the land that's being offered to them. Another way the government was encouraging settlement was the 1863 Homestead Act. I'm going to show you a poster advertising this Homestead Act. Here you can see an advertisement for farmers to move into the Iowa or Nebraska territory. You can buy land for on a loan for 10 years, so you had to pay your loan back within that time. There's the name of the company that was offering this loan. There's the interest rate on the land. And then there's a lot of fine print. You could probably find this online and enlarge it if you want to read it. I looked at it. There's not really anything fishy on it. Not really anything. They're not trying to hide anything, but still 6% interest. That's high for today's standard. I think today's rate for a home loan is less than 5%. So that was pretty high interest rate back then. Anyhow, Homestead Act, 160 acres free to any head of household. All they had to do, this head of household, this family, all they had to do was farm the land, cultivate the land for 5 years. And that 160 acres was free for them. You can see 600,000 families move into Kansas to take advantage of this Homestead Act. Now, to give you a better idea of what we're talking about here as far as the land size, this is 1 square mile. You can see 1 mile on each side, 1 square mile. One little block represents 1 acre. There is 160 acres in a quarter of a square mile. Here's another image to help you understand exactly what we're talking about. As far as an acre goes, again, this little block here is an acre. Well, if you watch a football game any Friday night, the green represents a standard American football field. The blue represents a standard soccer field. So anything outlined in red, or this area outlined in red, is 1 acre. So think about that the next time you go watch one of our football games. The end zone, the front of the end zone, to the opposing 10-yard line, and then 50 yards wide. That is an acre. So if you look at it, it's about 90 yards by 50 yards, roughly 1 acre. Now, what does that mean for you? Let's put it in a little bit better context so you can understand. I'm going to show you something that will help you better understand it. Aerial view of Nixa. This picture itself is 1 square mile. And just to give you an idea of where we're at, here's the high school. Here's the track and football field, Matthews Elementary. This is 1 square mile. So Nicholas Road, right here. Here's Gregg Road, and then this is about, I don't know, a few 100 yards east of Gregg Road. So again, 1 square mile. If you go a little bit further north up here, you'd run into Mount Vernon, or what is also known as Highway 14. So 1 square mile. So how much of this is 160 acres? Right there. So 160 acres free to any head of household who's willing to farm the land for 5 years and make it and cultivate it and make it profitable. That's 160 acres. So that's what the Homestead Act is offering up. A lot of African Americans, again, we're talking about this time period of Reconstruction, to escape the racism and prejudice of the South. Once African Americans gained their freedom, once African Americans were gaining some equality, we see the rise of the KKK. The North is not doing anything to stop it, or doing very little to stop the racism and the torture of African Americans by the KKK. So African Americans take advantage of this Homestead Act and move out to Kansas. Those African Americans moving from the South are known as exodusters. African Americans moving west are called exodusters. They are the only group that can fit into that terminology. And you can see here an advertisement for exodusters to move west, and then a family that has done so. This is just a typical dress. They're not out getting ready to go to church or anything. This is the typical dress. When the men were out in the fields, they may take their jackets and vests and ties off, but they would work in long pants and their long sleeves. Speculators. A speculator is a term used to describe someone who adjust or makes the best guess at to what the land might be worth. Railroads who were given this land by the government to sell to farmers, that was why the government was giving away land. Railroads only ended up giving away or selling 10% of the land that they received from the government, and we'll talk a little bit more soon what they do with that, the rest of that land. The government learns of this, and they try to strengthen the Homestead Act and try to encourage the railroad to get more land to farmers, but it doesn't work. And finally, letter A, another way in which the government was encouraging settlement out west was the Oklahoma land rush. We've seen pictures, but I'll show you a picture of this before. If you ever watch any Wild West movies, these men would line up on any given morning. News would be sent around the country about opening up territory in Oklahoma, and men, women, and children would come from all over the place. And they'd line up right outside the territory, and at the starting gun, just like a cross-country race really, at the starting gun fired by one of these land officials, fire the gun, these people take off. You can see they're on horseback, they're in wagons, some people would even ride bikes. But the idea is that you get out as fast and as quick as possible, again like a cross-country race, so you don't get packed in, and you get out and you stake your claim. And that's what it means to stake your claim. They would take stakes and they would plant them around in whatever area they could box in, and that would be their claim. Now there were some people in Oklahoma who went out a little earlier than what they were allowed to, and or sooner. So basically they were breaking the law, violating the land rush law, and they were given the nickname Sooners. And at one time the nickname of Sooner was equal to a cheat or someone who was dishonest. Not that the Oklahoma University Sooners are cheaters, are dishonest, but I'll leave that up to you. But that's where the nickname Sooner comes from, because they went out sooner than they were allowed to before the land was officially open. So again, ways in which the government was encouraging settlement. They would give land to railroads, hoping the railroads would then sell that land to farmers at a very low rate. That low rate would encourage farmers to move out west. When that didn't work, they started the 1863 Homestead Act, offering free land to anyone who would simply farm the land for 5 years and make it profitable. If you do that, that 160 acres is free. And then also the Oklahoma land rush. So 3 ways in which the government was encouraging settlers to move out west. Now this worked pretty well. It worked so well that there was a group of people who were afraid that we would lose our frontier. We'd lose this pristine land that we once had, the land of the Native Americans. So in 1872, the National Park Service was created to protect some of that land. By 1890, there's no land frontier left other than what's in the national parks, and there's a overwhelming feeling of regret that we have lost some of our natural land features. Now, once these farmers moved out west, how did they meet the dangers? How did they meet the challenges of the plains? Well, first you got to deal with housing. What are you going to live in? If you guys are out here, you've been across Kansas, you've been across Oklahoma. There's not a lot of trees out there. So how are you going to build your home? You can't just cut down a few trees like they did out west, or excuse me, back east, and make your log homes. So they had to use what they had available, and they had two forms of homes: dugouts and soddies. A dugout is where you would literally dig into the side of a hill and support the roof and the sides, and that would be your home. Or you could create a sod home. And if you are familiar with the type of turf or the grass that we have around in this area, it's Bermuda or some kind of really viney grass where it doesn't necessarily just grow straight up, it grows into each other, and it makes a really nice thick turf. Well, that's what they used. That's what predominantly they had out on the plains. Here is actually an elaborate sod home. You can see the wagon has been torn down, and wood slats from the wagon were probably used to support the roof, and then pieces of sod laid on top of that. You can see the bricks of sod in the sides of the room here. I say this is an elaborate sod home because this has an add-on, and it looks like maybe possibly a furnace and a chimney, indicating that there may be some kind of wood-burning stove inside. And then I don't know if that's the family pig or the family dinner, who knows, but they even have a door that will probably go somewhere, maybe here. in their sod home. So not the best living of quarters, but it provides some protection from the elements. Basically what they would do is they would dig down into the sod 4 or 5 inches thick and cut up little bricks, and then they would use them like we use stone brick today. Women out on the Great Plains, I've shown you a map that one family would live on 160 acres. So in that 1 square mile of territory that I showed you of Nixa, there would be 4 families living in that. Now that today is for us, that's pretty close. We walk to there. You could walk there pretty simply. But when the West first started being settled, there may be 1 family for every 10 square miles. So 10 square miles is not something you make a trek in one day, especially when the horses are out plowing the fields. You don't make that trek. So these people living out on the Great Plains are essentially alone. They get together maybe once a month on Sundays or whenever, maybe Saturday nights, but it wasn't like they were going over to each other's houses each night. So they're essentially alone. They have to be very self-sufficient. And the women, while the men are out working on the fields, the women are at home doing not only their own house chores and tending the garden for the family food, but also they have to take care of the men's work around the house. What used to be done by men back east are now being done by women out west. So plowing of you can see they're plowing of the family farm, the harvesting of the family farm, the shearing of sheep, as well as carding wool, making soap, and canning vegetables. Now some of that may sound a little foreign to you, so I've got you some pictures here to show you exactly what we're talking about. This is a woman dressed in colonial garb, but you get the idea. She's carding wool, and what they do is they take two tools that have spines or wires on it, and you pull the wool apart. Essentially, you stretch it, and you clean it, and you make it really nice and fine, and then you can thread it. You can see she's got her wheel there to thread to make the wool into thread. Here's women making soap over over a fire outdoors. It was interesting. I looked up some soap recipes and how the process was made. It's a pretty long process and very difficult, very dangerous too. I'm sure you've seen some lye soap from Silver Dollar City. And then canning of vegetables. I don't know why they call it canning when they put it in jars. Maybe they used to put it in cans. But people still do this today. I'm sure some of you have probably helped your grandparents do this today. You can can vegetables, can fruit. And what the people living on the Great Plains would do, since there was no refrigeration available or even in existence at this time, they would dig into a side of a hill or find a cave and keep their vegetables or fruits cool that way, because underground it's a constant temperature, pretty nice and cool. Schools and churches, again, given the distance, most of the women taught their own children at home. Churches, again, they would get together maybe once a month just because of the space and distance between families. The government gets in to help a little bit with technical support. We start to see machines being built. Necessity is the mother of invention. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but the land out west is a lot more difficult to farm than land back east. If you dug in the ground out here, you know it's very rocky. You get down about 3 or 4 inches and you're hitting all kinds of rocks. Back east you go 8, 10, 12 inches before you get into any rocks. So back east land is a whole lot different than the western or the Great Plains land. So we see some inventions being built to accommodate that. We have the very first steel plow by John Deere, and I'm sure you're familiar with John Deere, the green tractors. This is John Deere, and that's his very first steel plow. And this is Cyrus McCormick and the Reaper thresher. The Reaper is designed to cut down the crop. This is a Reaper thresher. The original Reaper simply cut it down, then you came and picked it back up and threshed it that way. The Reaper thresher cuts it down, bundles it, and drops it off to the side to be picked up and thrown on a wagon at a later time. The government also gets involved with education, helping these farmers, teaching these farmers how to cultivate this new land out here in the Great Plains. The Morrill Act of 1862 established money to be set aside by states for the building of agricultural colleges. Texas A&M, Florida A&M, these are all schools that were designed or built from this Morrill Act. Missouri, the University of Missouri, was also founded from money from the Morrill Act. A&M stands for Agricultural and Maintenance, so it teaches agricultural methods for the Western settlers. And the 1887 Hatch Act allows for experimental stations to be built around the Great Plains, basically experimenting with different crops or hybrids of crops for growing out on the Great Plains. Now, with this land being sold to farmers from the railroads at that high rate and high interest, a lot of farmers get into debt. Remember, the railroads only sold 10% of the farmland to these farmers. The remaining they would sell to very large investors, very wealthy investors, and these investors would create what we call Bonanza Farms. And this is an example of Bonanza Farm. There would be one farm growing a single crop on all this land. Instead of diversifying and growing several different crops, they grew a single crop. Growing that single crop causes a lot of problems, especially when we get into a drought situation. And that's exactly what happened between 1885 and 1890. We experienced huge droughts across the Midwest, and those droughts would wipe out that single crop. Now, some plants do better with less water. Soybeans, for example, if you drive down the highway today, you know, with the lack of rain that we've had, or the lack of rain you might have, the corn may not be doing well, but you look on the other side of the highway and the soybeans are doing just fine. So if you diversify your crop, you can be prepared for any kind of, or for some situations like that, like a natural disaster such as a drought. Well, the Bonanza farmers did not plan for that. So railroads sell a lot of land, huge amounts of land to Bonanza farms. They plant one crop. The drought wipes out that entire one crop. That Bonanza farmer doesn't pay his loan back to the railroads, and now the railroads are stuck with this debt. And who has to pay the extra rising costs on that? Well, the taxpayers. And so we see a lot of economic hardships. And to make up the cost of that loss of a Bonanza farm, since they can't pay the debt back to the railroad then raises prices on everyday farmers. So we see a huge rise in cost of grain, pushing the smaller farmers into even deeper debt. And that's the end of Chapter 5, Section 2. Again, watch this as many times as you need to. Fill in your notes, study 5 to 10 minutes each night, and fill in the form that accompanies this video. You can find the form right after this video and the online notes on Blackboard.